Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Process Podcast.
Boys, welcome to the podcast. Ant, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Schalk, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks.
Boys, we're here to talk about Hyrox. This episode is called How to Finish Outside the Top 2, but Inside the Top 10. We're going to talk about a lot of things today. I'm going to be firing you a bunch of questions, but really it's just a bit of a recap on last weekend. I think we all had a bloody good time, did we not?
Yeah, it was good. It was amazing to see Hong Kong host an event like that again. Obviously, we just had the Rugby Sevens, but to have like a sporting event that civilians can participate in was really cool.
Yeah, it's been probably about almost 3 years now since Hong Kong's had a fitness event that we could actually take part in.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you've had a few comps, and you obviously did semi-finals and travelled to Dubai.
Yeah.
Scott, when was the last time you did something like that? I think that was your first kind of big...
Yeah, apart from the Open, I think the last time I did anything competitive was high school, when I was 18, like in like a setting with people actually watching. That is how long ago? 8 years ago. So quite a while.
We should probably start by defining what Hyrox is for listeners. I think people have heard of Hyrox because it's been talked about a lot at the moment, and I know they're making quite a big splash in like the fitness news scene. But perhaps, Ant, could you just tell us what is a Hyrox event?
A Hyrox event, if we're talking about the pro that we're doing, is basically, think about it as 8 rounds for time. One round being a 1 kilometer run followed by a functional exercise. The functional exercises are a 1,000 meter ski erg. They are, what's the next one after ski erg? Oh, a 50 meter sled push, a 50 meter sled pull, followed by 80 meters worth of burpee broad jumps, followed by a 1K row, followed by a 200 meter farmer's carry, followed by 100 meters of sandbag lunges, followed by 100 wall balls. So in the pro division, there's a certain weight for men and women. In the open division, there's a certain weight for men and women. And there's also the ability to do partners or doubles. So yeah, there's no time cap on it. It's generally an indoor event. So there's no trouble of like weather or inclement weather or anything like that. And it's like a bit of like a party atmosphere in it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, kind of like a fitness festival.
Yeah,
kind of like almost like an Arnold Classic where they have all the different booths and fitness vendors from the country, and then they have this main stage or area where the fitness comp's taking place. It was a 2-day comp, and basically non-stop on the floor there are races happening, which I thought was really cool. Like there's always something to be watching, and there's always someone. Well, we had over 40 people in the coastal community taking part, so at every point within that weekend there was someone on the floor competing, which is pretty cool. My first question to both of you is, what did you think of the event itself? Schalk?
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it was the first time I've been to, what do we call, like a fitness event, a fitness race event or something like that. I think having every part of fitness in Hong Kong, there was bodybuilders, there was weightlifters, there was functional people, having everybody take part in like one specific thing was kind of nice to see, as well as people from the yoga side was there as well. I think it was very, very well set up. Race was very good. I enjoyed the race. And yeah, we did a TFL class. Me and Lotzi hosted a class on this Saturday.
Yeah.
At about 12 o'clock. That was good. Couple of familiar faces, couple of new faces as well. So yeah, enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was super cool seeing you guys on stage crushing it. I would say that my first observation when I walked into the arena was how fit everyone was. When I say fit, I mean aesthetically, like people looked fit. There was lots of like muscle on the men and the women. And I think that's what's quite cool about a Hyrox event. I feel like a Spartan race perhaps appealed a little bit more to maybe more of like an endurance type racer. So maybe like the more of the triathlon crowd. But this, obviously because of the implements between each run, attracted kind of the strength crowd just as much as it did maybe the endurance crowd. That's actually a question I want to ask you guys a little bit later. But I was actually quite blown away by how many jacked people there were competing in Hyrox. Did you guys feel that as well?
Yeah, definitely. There's also, because there is no prerequisite or like it's not really high skill, I guess a higher skill movement there would be the wall ball. It led for like a very low barrier to entry, and like it wasn't intimidating for people really to get involved with. I think people look at it and they actually think it's quite simple, but as you know, the three of us know, it is not a simple task at all. You know, the average finishing time is about an hour and a half. And that is an enormous task when you're working close to maximal the whole time.
Yeah, I think people's perception as to whether or not they should do the race was look at the implements, the 8 stations, and can I do them or not? I think the one massive oversight that the whole world, well, definitely Hong Kong made, was the fact that you still have to run 8 kilometers. And to a runner, that doesn't sound like much, but to someone who hasn't run, to run 8 kilometers alone non-stop is quite challenging. But throw in 8 implements where you're spending between 2.5 to 5 minutes on each station, like that accumulates to quite a lot of time doing aerobic activity. Speaking to the organizer, the finishing rate, the finishing percentage of a Hyrox event is 99.5%. So 99.5% of people who start will finish the race. And they said they will never stop someone finishing a race. If that means like 5 hours, 6 hours, or 2.5 hours, as our good friend Karan did, then like the organizer will always wait. And I think he was saying that the guy who created Hyrox in Germany, the whole goal was to be able to create a mass event in a small space and not ever have bottlenecks. So in the way that it's designed, kind of like having waves within a division, but also just having staggered starts means there's always multiple divisions on the floor at the same time, but there's never a point where someone doesn't have an implement that they can be doing. I'd be interested to know if that actually happened. Did you guys ever see a crossover, a bottleneck take place?
Not in Hong Kong. We only had I think they said they only had about 1,000 signups in Hong Kong because this is the first time it's ever run. I could imagine somewhere like London where they had 3,000 signups. Like I was watching just like an Instagram video the other day, and it looked like it was hectic on the floor. It was like, yeah, that was a partners one as well. So you got someone working at one time and someone just standing. That just takes up more space. And like if it's a ski erg, there's a huge range that people could be finishing a ski erg in 3.5 minutes. People might be taking like 7.5 minutes, but they just seem to have like enough equipment, and it seems to flow and work pretty well, to be honest.
Yeah, I do know that Hong Kong probably had, like, on the smaller scale of size in terms of the venue, I'm sure Hyrox have like a minimum requirement that a space must have to make it happen. So our run course was definitely a bit different to what most other Hyroxes were. We had basically like an L shape, so there's 2 U-turns, and you had to do 3 laps of the L shape to complete your 1K each time. And I think that definitely had an impact on probably the paces, but definitely I think had an impact on like our bodies as well. Just that constant deceleration and acceleration and turning on the same side all the time. But still cool. They still made it work. Was there anything, be honest here, where the event fell short of your expectations?
Yeah, I think the run course is probably something that they need to look at. I think if you're trying to qualify athletes to a world championships, which is essentially what Hong Kong is, it's like step 1 in a 2-step process to get to world championships. World championships takes the top 1 to 3, depending on how many signups there are for that event, and they qualify them to the world champs in this year's in Manchester. So I think if you're doing that, of course, it doesn't matter because you're only taking that person from that event. So if it's a harder run course or a different or a squiggly run course like we had, it doesn't actually matter. But when that person is comparing their times to someone who races in Dallas, in London, and wherever it is, that should really be standardized across. So if, I know Tammy did one a few years ago in Leipzig in Germany, and she said it was like a circular track. Run it twice and it's obvious to go in. For us, it's like you're actually having to look at the screen. You're having to make these U-turns. You're having to decelerate, accelerate, turn left, turn right. And like also with multiple people on the track at the same time, you're literally dodging people the whole time. So that would be probably my only gripe with it. But that was, like I said, it was minor, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it did actually trip a lot of people up because there was a lot of people who missed laps.
Yeah.
I think there's one point in the women's pro where the screen actually went down, so the screen stopped working for a couple of laps, so people weren't able. Basically, there was a screen where you could see how many laps you'd done and how many more laps you had to go. I think the screen
which
went
is
down.
really cool. I think that's
I think it's a really
helps,
good idea. It's a way to help mitigate the issue of having to run lots of laps. And they did actually say before, like, don't rely on the screen. Count your own laps. So lots of people did get quite hefty time penalties. But I think even the stations, when you would come in from the run, it would logically make sense to be station 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, kind of in the chronological order, but it was kind of like a bit all over the place.
Yeah, it's all over, sure.
I think the volunteers did an amazing job of like helping direct you to where you would go next. But I would say that my probably biggest criticism, and I think, I just don't want to take anything away from the event because I had an amazing time. I thought they did an incredible job. But going back to what you said, which is if this is now turning into a sport where there's prize money involved and there's got a qualification process and there's like an opportunity for athletes to progress through the sport, then things like judging standards is another thing that I think has to be looked at. And always going to be super hard. We have this issue in CrossFit as well, where basically everyone who judges in the sport are all volunteers who are doing it out of their own goodwill, their own free time, not getting paid for it, which is incredible. You need those people to make this event work. But of course, things like standards have to be adhered to, especially if you're qualifying athletes to later rounds. And I think it's always going to be quite hard in an event like that where there's so many participants. It means that not every athlete can have their own judge. So what they had was kind of like floating judges, right? So a judge would be responsible for an area. So in that area, at any one time, there could be one person or there could be 10 people. And obviously, if you've got 10 people and you've got one judge trying to look at all the reps, that's going to be a really hard thing to do. And also, ultimately, it's essentially the judge who deems whether you finish the work. So if there's on a sled, like there's 4 lengths you have to do, essentially it was a judge who would say, yes, you're done. But when you got a whole floor of sleds going up and down and not a judge per sled, that's actually quite hard. I can see how that would maybe potentially fall through the gaps there. And I think it's just a tough one, isn't it? Because you create movement standards to create a level playing field for everyone in the event. Forget the whole qualifying to next round. And I definitely know that within probably some of the lower level competitions, I don't mean lower, sorry, let's say like the open division or the team divisions, there was definitely more of like, we're just here for fun, like who cares about the standards, which I think is it's a good thing. But then you can't have standards and say that these are movement standards and then not uphold them. Well, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. And also, like, this happens, this is not just at Hyrox, but it happens in like you said, CrossFit competitions as well. Like, your heats 4, 3, and 2 are like, there's some lax judging standards, and then suddenly heat 1 has got the top judges, it's got the best guys who've the most experience, and they uphold the standards well. And the athletes generally move well as well. You know, I definitely experienced that. At one point, I got told that my heel just clipped a line on the last burpee broad jump, and it was one of the organizers who then basically came up to me and said, hey, your foot touched a line. And so I just like stopped and looked at him and waited for him to tell me what to do. Like I was just about to just take off my run. And then the judge who judged me said it was fine. He said I hit the line, and I ended up standing there for 10 seconds. Like, is this guy a head judge? Is he going to send me back to do another burpee? And he just looked at me in silence. She looked at me in silence, the person who was actually judging me. And I thought, fuck, all right, I'm just going to do another burpee here just so this guy shuts up or doesn't tell me off. So I just got on the floor, did an extra jump. No one said anything. I just ran. So I probably could have just run off. So there was no like head judge on the floor at one time, although there was labels on the shirts that said head judge. I don't think they were more qualified or less qualified than anyone else. Definitely on things like a wall ball, it was quite hard to see, and it was hard to watch. When I say hard to watch, it's like it was a bit cringeworthy for us coming from, you know, we get scrutinized a lot with standards, to then see things like a wall ball where it didn't hit the target, or the squat wasn't being made, or like a bucket literally gets put under your ass and the bucket is like 45 degrees, like you're not even near parallel, especially if you're a shorter person. There's a one bucket size, so it's almost advantageous to say I can't hit depth in a squat, and you're just bouncing off a bucket, which is basically you're bending your knees like to 10 degrees the whole time. So yeah, that would be one thing. And yeah, there's definitely like a discrepancy between like, oh, you're an older person, it's okay, just kind of like we'll let you off with that and just get over that line and just, you know, you're working well, versus like, hey, like you're a young fit person, like you need to do the standards properly. Yeah.
Scott?
Yeah, I think I personally definitely rode, I think, the line of the standards, because we were watching on Saturday and we were on the burpee line, and you have a gap of how many inches do you have from your foot where you can place your hands?
1 foot. One of your feet, apparently, which
No,
I think is
forearm. There's a forearm length.
Was it a forearm length?
Yeah.
I thought it was like 6 inches. Somebody told me it was 6 inches.
Yeah.
So I was definitely, I think, seeing what they did on Saturday. A few of the people actually said, do your burpee over, because where they were placing their hands was just too far away. But when I went, I didn't like fall forward almost, but my hands were definitely quite a far way forward compared to whoever was going on Saturday. Same thing for the wall balls as well. Like I figured out halfway through the judges only looking at the top really, and not looking at how deep you're going. I was definitely still going parallel, but not as deep as we would normally go for.
Yeah,
Like let's say a CrossFit workout or something.
And
so
I think
you can definitely play around with it.
That's totally normal. You know, you're very fatigued. Like at the end of the day, like you want to be as efficient as possible.
Yeah.
So if you're doing more than you need to do, that's not efficient, and you're expending more energy per repetition. Like if you're getting away with repetitions, then it's hard to know what you're actually doing sometimes when you're that fatigued as well as an athlete. So it's totally understandable.
Yeah.
And I think also as well, they relied on the movement standards being briefed via video, which didn't allow for any questioning of the standards. So like some people are literally landing on the burpees. So for the people that are listening, what Schalk just said is basically wherever you jump and land with your 2 feet, your hands, the base of your hand has to be within a forearm's length of your toe, which is very, very subjective anyway, before you put your hands down. And like some people are literally like frog jumping on the floor, like landing and like zombie pressing on the way up and then jumping, which was ridiculous. It was quite funny to watch.
It was funny, yeah.
It was funny to watch, but like, you know, the judge was then trying to communicate. The judge was doing the right thing, like, hey, just stop. But the person would just keep going. So they're like chewing up 5-6 jumps at a time, which is like 20 to 30 meters. And by the time the judge actually got the point across, they're like, oh, for God's sake, just go. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you're too stupid to understand is basically what the judge would be thinking. But, you know, it's not that person's fault. They've never been taught how to do a burpee broad jump and never been shown it. Obviously, there's a video. But what if they haven't watched a video? Whereas like a CrossFit event, generally speaking, it's like all athletes gather now. Execute your movement. This is how it is. Have you got any questions? No. Okay, cool. This is a penalty. If you don't do it, go. Yeah. So, yeah, I also didn't understand. Like, I saw there was a couple of penalties on the burpees. There was a couple of penalties on the lunges that were given out. But I don't know, like, who deems the penalty. Because a lot of people are like, hey, go back and do that step again. So is that the penalty? But other people were getting 5-minute penalties on lunges, which is horrendous versus doing an extra lunge.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not really sure.
I want to say one really cool part of this event, which I think is awesome, is like the incorporation of technology.
Yeah.
And when you compete at Hyrox, you get given an ankle timer or an ankle chip, just like doing many high-level CrossFit events. And basically that chip is going to record your time taken to complete the race. But when you finish a race, you actually get given a full breakdown of your whole event, which I think is really, really cool. So that basically goes into like every single run, all 8 runs, what your split was. It gives you the time taken to complete each station, but it also gives you the time taken transitioning from the run to the station and then the station back to the run. Yeah. So like the geeky data focused people could really look at that. And these results are all shared with the world. So there are people who are now doing like big interpretations of all the data and creating averages and basically kind of starting to game the sport and see where time can be made up, where it's lost.
It's also good for the judging stuff as well. So I didn't realize, but on the sled pull and the sled push, there's a cable that ran through the middle of the 12.5 meters. And every time your ankle chip went through it, it would record 1. And then you got to go to the other side, it would record 2. So if someone did 2, just so they did 25 half the length, then it would show up on the thing. That's how the penalty is deemed for a lot of them.
Where were they? Was there a screen that the judges were seeing when it was happening? Or was this just after the fact?
No, I asked, because when I was watching on the day, I said, hey, that person's done 6. And then Richard, the organizer, ran over and just shoot him on. But that was like a mixed division. There was only one person on the sled at that time, and no one was really watching them. But then he explained to me, he's like, that machine there you're looking at, which basically looks like this. He's like, there's a cable running underneath. Every time your anklet goes over that, it will register on our system that you've done 12 and a half, cool. Which is pretty cool.
Cool.
So he's like, if you do more, we can see, and if you do too little, we can also see.
Yeah. So just going back to this technology then that we're talking about, it gives you all your splits. It also allows you to look at any other competitor who raced and look at their splits. And it gives you what placing within your race you finished in on each of those stations, which I think is really, really cool. So I know we all have our splits in front of us here. Firstly, we'll start with 10th place. Schalk. Schalk, what was your finishing time?
Finishing time overall was 1 hour, 19 minutes, and 12 seconds.
And in your age division?
Out of a stacked field of 2 guys.
Don't need to say
that. First, actually.
Awesome. So 1 hour 19, first in your age group.
Yep.
Top 10, 10th place finish. I will go next. So I finished 4th. My time was 1 hour 15:35. And in my stacked division of 2 people, I finished second. So last in my division, technically. Ant?
My finishing time was 1 hour, 8 minutes, 30 seconds. I was second in my age division, but there was a lot of people in my division. So
2.
No, there was 3, but he wasn't there for the podium. He left. So there's only 2 of us in the photo.
To be fair, the guy I lost to won the whole thing, so it's a good person to lose to. Okay, so my first question to you, Schalk, is did you have a finishing time target in mind?
Honestly, no.
No idea.
No. I think around about the hour and 15 mark, somewhere around there. I don't know where I got that from, because all the Hyrox stuff I've been watching has either been like elite people or teams, and that is obviously not where I'm falling into anyway. But yeah, I think about an hour, 15 minutes, somewhere between that and an hour and a half.
Did you have any idea what place you would finish? Did you have a target for that?
No, I had no idea. I mean, because the only people we knew that was going to take part was from the gym, really. Like, we had no idea who else was signed up, how many people were signed up until about a few days before.
Yeah.
And even with the list of actual people, I only knew one extra guy outside of Coastal, so I had no idea the levels of people we were going to go up against. So.
Yeah, I'll go next. I thought, having done the renditions of the workout, that I'd probably be around the 112 to 115 mark. I wanted to say that I was going to finish sub 110, but after seeing Tammy go, and she finished about 107, right? I knew that sub 110 probably wasn't going to be doable. I also definitely, in the run-throughs, I hadn't done any sled work, but I actually made a lot of time on that. But the run definitely was a lot slower on the day. I just think because of the course, we've been practicing on basically like a massive round track. Yeah. We had been throwing in 1 U-turn at the end, but we were essentially on race day doing 6 U-turns in 1 lap. So it's very different. In terms of placing, I also had no idea because I didn't know anyone else who was competing other than I knew the closest people were going to be you 2. And I had no idea.
Karan.
No, to be honest, Karan, I knew he was going to be. What happened to Karan is essentially what I knew would happen to Karan. It just happened
way earlier,
10 minutes earlier than I thought it was going to happen. Now, in all jokes aside, Karan basically got cramp when he started. Basically, when he stepped off the start mat and crossed the start line, Karan got cramp and ended up walking the whole race. He finished it in about 2.5 hours, and I think that's actually really commendable
and generous.
Quitting was not really an option for him. It was pretty cool at the end to see like the community spirit of everyone getting behind him. We were kind of all on the course with him. The judges were like, let's just all get in the arena with him and finish us off. He was basically going down periodically with cramp kind of every 5 or so minutes, but he kind of persevered. But in the lead up, Karan was calling me out, especially in probably the 3 months leading up to it, saying he was going to beat me. And my response was, you're just going to cramp and you're not going to be able to move the sled. Poor guy, actually kind of happened.
Both are true, yeah.
Yeah. Ant, tell me.
I wanted to finish in under 1 hour, if I'm honest. So 8.5 minutes faster than what I did. And I backed myself to win it. I mean, I can elaborate more on that if you want me to.
We're going to go into pacing and strategy soon. But can I just ask, like, why, what made you back yourself to win it?
I think firstly my ability on the functional exercises. Every time I did it in the run-throughs and just looking at them on paper, like nothing like strikes fear into me. There's nothing I'm worried about, and I had a very good understanding in myself of a pace that I can hold on all of those implements, whether it's like breaking up the wall ball or putting down the farmer's carry or holding on the row or holding on the ski. It was like, years of doing sled work with rugby. I'm very confident on it, even though 175 kg is a lot. I still have a lot of confidence in it. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing was I thought I'd done enough running. And my running paces were feeling actually really good. I was very confident in them. I was hitting good paces when I was doing the run-throughs here, even when myself and Tammy did a run-through outside and we did the sled on the concrete. And that was like horrendously hard. And I remember that took me about an hour and 11 minutes when I did it out there, but the sled, I was literally on it for like 12 minutes because I couldn't push it, which obviously drains you a shitload and blows out your legs and your lower back and your midline and your lungs. And I still managed to hold a pretty high cadence on my runs, always about like 410 to 420 within that range. I was confident in both. So I thought that I would be better than all my competitors at the functional exercises, and I would be one of the top 3 at least in the running anyway.
Yeah, and I think
not on the first kilometer, sorry, but every kilometer thereafter.
Yeah, I think also something that we did have an advantage was obviously we did renditions of this, and we'll talk about our prep a little bit later. But I think we had all done enough preparation work to know roughly what our potential finishing time was going to be. And then, of course, there's a ton of Hyroxes that had taken place over the last 3 years, and all the data is online that anyone can view at any point in time. So it's not complete random guesswork here. Like, for example, Ant, you could actually look, and if you'd actually finished sub 1 hour, you'd be finishing, if not winning, pretty much any Hyrox around the world, right? Okay, my next question, before we actually go into pacing and execution, I'd like to hear about you guys in terms of what your strategies were and what actually happened on the day. But I'd actually like to talk about kind of like the mental aspect of competing again, or competing in the very first Hyrox, which was like, how did you actually feel before the event? And I think there's 2 parts to this. The first one is, how did you feel in the days or weeks leading up to the event? And then how did you actually feel on like the day before and the day of competition? Scott, start with you.
I think weeks leading up, I only signed up 4 days before the actual race. So the cutoff day was the Monday. I signed up on that Monday evening. I think weeks leading up to it, I wasn't actually thinking about the race that intensely, if I'm completely honest. We all did about, 2 sessions a week, more Hyrox specific sort of stuff. I enjoyed the running, I enjoyed all of those sort of things, but about the actual race, I didn't put that much thought into it until about, I think, 2-3 days before the actual race. The day before, as I say, we did the TFL thing the day before, and I think just walking in there, firstly I was nervous about the TFL thing first before I was nervous about the Hyrox thing. So once that was out of the way, then the nerves about the actual race sort of took over. I think also just then seeing the guys you're going to go up against and seeing the guys that were in the open division as well. I was like, well, if these guys are running these times with these weights and stuff, will I be able to, perform in a certain time frame what I'm thinking I'm going to be able to, with me, let's say, thinking I'm a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, whatever. So it was definitely, I think, a bit of doubt in my mind as well going into the actual race. But yeah, on the day, as I said, the morning of, I was quite nervous. Couldn't really eat a whole bunch the day before as well.
Did you sleep well that night?
Did not sleep well, no. Did not sleep well at all. A couple of wake-ups. I think about 3 or 4 times I got up. Then the next morning, woke up, had my breakfast. I think the last meal was about 4 hours before. And then couldn't get anything else really in after that. And then, on the starting line, it's basically you're just standing, and then you realize, okay, well, here we are now. So you're either going to do the next hour or you're not going to do it. So there you go.
And did the nerves ease off as soon as you started?
I think as we warmed up, I think the nerves started easing off. I think it's more the anticipation. Also the standing around, seeing people actually do the event was a lot worse than actually doing the actual event. So I think it would have been a bit better if I actually didn't arrive 3 hours before. And just watching people struggle for 1 hour and 20 minutes. And if I arrived like an hour before, that would have made it a little bit easier, I think.
Nice.
Yeah.
And
yeah, same idea in terms of arriving on the day. I was there because myself and Tammy, I guess, were the main leaders and coaches for all these guys representing Coastal. So I felt it was my obligation, but also I wanted to cheer these guys on. I thought it was important to me and for the community that I was there. And obviously Tammy competed on Saturday, so for both days I think I ended up being there for like 10 hours, like 9 to 10 hours, which is like a lot when you're not actually competing. So I would definitely change that next time. But I thought it was, like I said, I still see the importance of me being there. In terms of leading up to the race, no, I was getting more and more confident every training session I did. Bought new shoes, which felt better. Felt like they made me a little bit faster.
did Puma sponsor you in the end?
No, because I was shit, so they didn't sponsor me. Unfortunately, I didn't have a case to go to them with. But no, yeah, I was feeling really good each time. The week before the race, actually, I tweaked my neck in a training session, and I could feel that. I didn't feel like my training was getting too much, but there was like other parts of my life that were quite a lot at the time, and that probably just tipped me over the edge. It wasn't affecting me on game day, but obviously the week leading up to that, I was pretty stiff and pretty tight, so that wasn't ideal. But no, I think I like game day nerves. I generally, apart from last weekend, I generally perform well on game day when it comes to competitions. So yeah, I guess I was like thriving with the pressure. I enjoyed it.
Nice. Yeah, I was leading into the event actually feeling really good. Even in the final week, I felt super confident. I'd backed the training that I'd done. Even in my last 2 weeks, my training was not great. I had obviously a couple of boozy weekends, and like my body was just didn't recover from them, so I had to skip the last like hard Hyrox session and didn't do anything that day. And then in the final week, I tried to go on a run on the Tuesday before Hyrox, and like my knees were just like, nah, mate. So I sacked that after about 2 or 3K. But I knew the months leading up to that, I'd put in enough run work. And I think like there was nothing about the functional movements that I was nervous about. I knew I could do all those things quite well.
You knew you didn't have to hit depth in the wobble.
You didn't have to hit depth and wobble. I'd seen the judging standards before. No, but I knew that I'd be comfortable with all of them. I actually do like wobbles actually. So in terms of confidence in the work that I put in, there was no doubt there. I knew I could finish a race. And then I'd say the day before, it was probably on the Saturday, being in there for the whole day. It was just like there was just a lot of stimulation. Like the music was super loud. Was cheering for all our athletes the whole day. It was really exciting. Obviously, you can't help but think about your own race every now and then. And sometimes watching those people can feed your confidence, and sometimes it can take away from your confidence.
There's also no food in there.
There was no food in there. Yeah, I did bring my own food ahead of time, but I just knew more than anything, just being in a very stimulated environment for a lot of hours was probably going to have some form of impact on me. Actually ended up having a decent sleep on the Saturday night. I know that I notoriously don't sleep very well before competitions anyway, so given the circumstances, it was probably as good as it could have been. Still wasn't great. And then actually the hardest time for me was a Sunday morning, waking up at my normal time of around 5:45, and then having essentially kind of like 5-6 hours to kill before going to the venue, because I wanted to get there a little bit early and cheer everyone else on. And that was where I really felt a lot of like the self-talk coming into my head. And I think the self-talk was a lot of it was like reassuring myself to not get caught up in the race, because I know that I'm someone who can stay in my own lane, and I knew what I needed to do to do my best in this race, and it wasn't going to be sprinting out the gates, and I knew that everyone was going to sprint out the gate. So it's just constant reassuring of that. And then I guess like feelings of like failure avoidance, like hoping you don't fail, which I know is obviously something a lot of athletes deal with. It's like performance anxiety really. But I did actually enjoy the process of like recognizing the thoughts and then doing something about the thoughts. So it was usually that was just me saying out loud, like, okay, I'm thinking this, I'm feeling this, and then just using strategies to bring me back to the present and not be focusing on it. But I think like you, as soon as I started warming up, I felt really good. Like all the nerves went at the start mat. I was actually super relaxed, which is exactly what I wanted to be. There wasn't like nerves or butterflies by that point in time. But yeah, definitely just standing around all day, just waiting for my turn. I was kind of just hoping the whole time. I was like, I wish we were the first event on Saturday to get it out the way, and then be there to support everyone else after. Okay, let's talk about pacing and execution. So we're talking about strategy here. So we'll start with you, Scott, because we've been doing that the whole time. Firstly, what was your strategy on race day?
So if we dial it back a few weeks to us starting our Hyrox prep, I've never been someone who runs with a watch and who actually tracks the paces. But with us doing the same loop basically twice a week for 8-10 weeks, we got used to, so me and Karan would always have a stopwatch on him. So we would know once we take this corner, we should be here. Once we take this corner, we should be there. So in that, I created some sort of pacing awareness on this sort of track and how that should feel. And then obviously once you put me in a different track, that just goes out the window, because I have no idea where I should be time-wise around this corner. No watch at all. There's also one thing that I thought might have been nice if they had a massive clock that restarts every single time for every single heat, so you can see basically where you're at, because I had no reference of time at all.
Yeah, they just had one massive running clock.
Yeah.
It said like
so
5 hours, 50.
Has it been an hour and a half? Has it been 15 minutes? I had no idea. So the pacing for the run, to be honest, I was basically just sitting around or thinking I'm going to sit around you and Karan, somewhere around there.
Karan obviously went out the picture after about 10 seconds.
And then he went out the window. So both my, can you say, guides
Yeah.
just left me. Because I was behind you in the start line, right?
You were ahead of me.
I was behind you, then I went around because you guys were a little bit slow, so I went around.
No, basically when you got to the ski erg before me,
Yes.
and you stayed ahead of me until the sled
Yeah,
pull,
I'm still pretty certain that you didn't do all your laps. I'm 100% sure.
Nah,
No, I'm joking.
I know where you dropped off and where I
Yeah.
made a move. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I got to the ski, and the plan was to hold about a just under 2 minute pace in the ski because that's relatively comfortable. We've been holding that comfortably as well. And then the second run felt fine. I think where I lost my legs was going from the push. I think I went a little bit too hard in the sled push, and then from there, the walk from the actual push out to my first run took me a while, and getting around that first loop, that took me a while. My pace has dropped off. My run pace, our first laps was like 3 minutes, 3:31. I can actually double check real quick.
Yeah,
so
the
first lap,
first K is not a K though.
A
yeah,
little bit shorter.
Yeah.
so that took us over 3 minutes and 33 seconds. And my slowest lap was, I can't find
You
it
didn't
right
get
now.
cramped though either, did you?
No, I cramped on the lunges.
You don't even
actually.
have an
I
excuse.
cramped on the lunges. Slowest lap. I can't find it right now.
So I guess though, Scott, you didn't really have a strategy going into it. It was just basically stay around me for the runs.
Yeah, I had a general feel because I knew some runs we did outside, like I pushed myself a little bit too much, and I felt like my legs feel like my body heats up quite a bit when I go a little bit too hard. So I try to avoid that feeling. But yes, as you said, I had like general markers of people that I want to stay around. And then when you took the lead, I was like, well, now I'm just out here by myself. So I just basically kept on cruising, trying to feel good and also saving myself for the wall balls. So my last run was actually, I think, my slowest run, just because I knew I could make up a little bit of time on the wall balls if I felt decent going into there. So yeah.
Nice. And
Yeah.
start fast, steer fast.
Yeah. No. I started my first run fast.
Can I just say, holy shit, you boys went so
was
fast,
so quick.
so fast now. I think within literally 10 meters, 2 groups had formed straight away, and me and Scott were in the back, and we were just looking at each other like, okay, stay slow, and you boys had literally disappeared after like 10 seconds.
Yeah, I mean that was my plan. It was always that I wanted to stay with the lead group on the first lap. And then I also knew that there'd be a lot of noobs who just end themselves on the ski erg. One, because if you have poor technique on a ski erg, it'll eat you up. And two, because people are just excited.
Everyone can do it.
Yeah, exactly. So people are just going to start ripping on the chain as fast as they can. And then be smooth out the second run. And then I already knew that I was going to break the sled push a lot more than everyone else. Like, I know you boys were going unbroken, right? And I broke it the middle point of each one deliberately. The reason I didn't do that in training is because we were pushing on concrete, which was way harder to move it on.
once
You
you
couldn't
get it started,
start.
yeah.
Exactly. But I knew on the carpet, like, I could just lean into it and it would start moving. So there wasn't like any advantage or disadvantage to having to stop and start again. And I actually ended up, so if I look at my placing on here, I actually ended up coming 14th on the sled push, which was the worst.
What was your time?
On the sled push, 2:32.
See, this is such an interesting part because I've geeked out about the numbers quite a lot. Is that okay? I finished 4th on the sled push, but I was only 30 seconds ahead of you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the same as a ski erg and a row. Is that you can have a low placing, but the time difference is minimal.
Yeah.
Whereas 5 places on a wall balls is actually like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I deliberately went slow on the sled push because I knew it would just tank people's legs as well. And again, I knew people's legs would still be feeling fresh enough that they can chip through those 50 meters pretty quick. But it was the next run between that and the sled pull where then people I remember like seeing the only person that I knew in the heat outside of Coastal, like he was walking already. And I'm like, oh God, like he's in trouble.
Yeah.
And a few people had massively dropped off. But then me and the 2 guys who were in front of me were still together, like, and we were still in like a little pack. And my strategy at that point was that I know the last 4 movements are really good for me. So the row, the farmer's carry, the lunge, and the wall ball. And I knew that I'd basically still be able to execute those as if I was fresh, even after a lot of Ks of running, and other people wouldn't, because that's when the weight gets a bit heavier, the skill goes up a little bit on the wall ball as well. But unfortunately, it didn't turn out that way for me. I ended up getting cramp in the third kilometer, and then I managed to kind of like stave it off a little bit. So like I had to keep coming back into the rock zone. So the rock zone is basically the area you enter and then, go to your designated
Kind of like a dead
exercise.
zone between the station and the run.
Yeah, exactly. So every time I got into the rock zone from the 3rd kilometer onwards, I'd have to sit in a squat for like anywhere between probably 25 to 60 seconds, depending on how bad the cramp was. It was at its worst on the 4th run before the row. So when I came back in for the row, like I was in like full lock of both my quads, and it was fucked. It was bad. So I was like just sat in a squat, and I was like pouring water down my mouth just to try to get something. And at this point, I was no longer aerobically challenged, whereas every training session I've done, I've been like blowing hard, and I'm like pushing through aerobically. My lungs are bleeding, and my heart is pounding.
So what you're saying is that you had to move too slow
Yeah,
to manage the cramp, that the aerobic system wasn't
correct.
challenged anymore.
Yeah, so I was running like a cowboy on my heels basically as I was like trotting along the course, and I could see the boys, the 2 lads in front of me, getting further and further away from me on the run, but I was still catching them on the functional exercise. So like the row, for example, I came 7th in the row, and I didn't use my legs once. I just ripped it as hard as I could with my biceps the whole time. Like the guy came over to me, he's like, "Madam, yeah, don't know if you know this, but you're supposed to use your legs when you row." I was like, "Yeah, mate, like I can't move my legs. They're like actually so locked up." He's like, "Man, you're really going to burn out your upper body for the farmer's carry." I was like, "I know, mate, piss off, like leave me alone." And then Tammy came over, she's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I can't bend my legs anymore. Like I'm in trouble here." But actually in the last 200 meters of the row, because I didn't use my legs, the cramp went from my VMOs and my quads. And then as soon as I started running again, bang, it hit. And then the worst part for me was the last 2 runs was in my hamstring cramp hit in. So my hamstrings are always okay, and I can always kind of trot through a quad cramp. Like they're going to be sore and they're going to be getting more and more fatigued, but you can still move. But as soon as your hammy goes, like you have to straighten your leg. Otherwise you're in trouble. And like when a hammy properly locks up, it's bad. So as soon as my hamstring cramp hit on the 7th K, I actually had to start stopping on the runs, which I hadn't done yet.
I did see you do the old classic dad stretch.
Yeah, I was
legs straight, just leaning forward.
Literally nothing I could do at that point. It was only my left hamstring actually that went. So on the 7th and 8th run, those are both bad, and that's what hit me the worst.
Yeah. My strategy was literally just go slow and steady, and I wanted my heart rate to be basically on this like slow incline throughout the entire race. And then I knew it was going to peak on the wall balls where I'd be able to like just empty the tank. And so the thing I was reiterating to myself the whole time was like, just your own race. Like I know what pace I can hold. I wasn't using my watch either. I just kind of went by feel. But I know that I didn't ever want to get to a point where like my breathing rate was like through the roof, or I was like having to hunch over on my knees, or like I felt like I was losing run form, when you start like flailing and like squeak, like running a bit weird. There was one training session that we did where I was put in with a bunch of fast guys, yourself, Aaron, a few of our other good runners, and I tried to run their race to see if I could push my run paces a bit more, and it messed me up. I got to like 3 rounds in, I was like, I've just gone too hard, I can't sustain this. So that was a good lesson in training to know, okay, you're going to have to just stay back, and kind of like I knew I was not going to be the fastest runner, but I could probably make up a bit of time and all the functional movements. The biggest eye-opener for me was that sled push. In hindsight, that's probably the one station I got wrong, and I would have done in hindsight what you did, which is basically do like just lean into it, do a half push, rest a bit, half push, and that would have just preserved my heart rate a lot more. And instead, I think what we both did, Schalk, was when I started moving it, I was like, oh, this is easy. I didn't feel hard at all. So I was like, I'm just going to get this done in one chunk. And as soon as I finished, I basically pushed 12 and a half, rested like not even 10 seconds, pushed the next 12 and a half, and then I felt my heart rate was like pounding out my chest, and I was like, oh shit, maybe gone a little bit too hard here. But I didn't think in the moment to slow down my cadence and just go halfway. I just thought, shit, I've only got 2 more to go. And I think I just never really bounced back. And so I looked at my heart rate after the race, the next day actually, because the Apple Watch kind of does a rough heart rate calculation. And basically I have 2 peaks, 2 spikes in my heart rate. One is on the sled push and the next one's on the wall balls. And that's not what I wanted. I want it to be a slow, gradual increase. And so, basically the runs preceding, the runs following the 2 sled pushes, like I felt didn't feel good. Like that was where I felt uncomfortable. My breathing rate was through the roof, but I took confidence because I would see everyone else, including you, Schalk, come out the sled being like, okay, I feel messed up, but these guys are way more messed up than me. Actually, Schalk, you didn't look too bad, but some of the other guys who'd been leading up until that point were just like written off, like they were already stopping. And I think I pretty much cruised everything else at the right pace. Same for you, Ant. I got in my run before the row. I started feeling calf cramp coming in, and I was like, shit. Like when cramp kicks in for me, like there's no coming back from it.
Yeah.
And normally it gets to a point where like I get full seizures in both calves that like my toes go permanently pointed and I literally cannot do anything to undo it. And so as soon as I started feeling like the zapping coming in, you know, when you push off, I did what you did. I started running on my heels. And then I started thinking, like, my tibs are going to be so sore tomorrow. And I'm like, I'm only not just gone past halfway in this event. And literally the rest of the event, so I never got feelings of cramp on any of the functional stations. I felt good, like actually.
Yeah.
And I'd come out the functional station being like, oh, I think my cramp's gone. And I'd probably get 400 meters into a run and then both my calves will start going again. And so I was literally just praying that my body wouldn't go into a full seizure of cramp. And so I couldn't, like you, like aerobically, my heart rate had come down so much that I was kind of like smiling, running around the track, but just saying like, please body, like we've just got 2 more runs to go. Just get me to the wall balls and I'll be fine. Cause I knew once I start doing the other movements, I'd be okay. So yeah, when I look at my paces, like I was 21st at the ski erg, so I was super slow. Sled push, I went way too fast on. Sled pull, I was trying to get my heart rate back down again. I also don't think I found really a good rhythm and groove on the sled pull technique. Yeah. I kind of played with a bunch of different ones when I was doing it. I started with hand over hand, then I started kind of going like to a side pull. Then I ended up doing basically like the half pull, then the walk back.
Yeah.
I still think I need to find like what would be the most optimal technique. I think
that's probably what blew up my quads more. That's
yeah,
like
me too.
A lot more contractions than I'd done in every other session. Just walking that back, like going from a really hunched over position, then extending the body and then walking back.
Yeah.
Is probably just like another 100 contractions that I hadn't done in my quads.
But that's actually what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to have to use my legs more because I knew that my legs would probably give up on the run.
But even doing that technique, my lats were also still blown up. When I started running, I was like, oh shit, I feel like I got like carpets under my armpits right now trying to run.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt like I didn't quite nail that one. But you know what's interesting is, so the top 3 times the wall balls were us 3. Yeah. And then Schalk, you had the second best time than myself. And I think just what's interesting for anyone who's going to do a Hyrox is when you look at the separation on each of the functional movements, different stations have bigger degrees of separation. So the degree of separation on a ski erg is minimal. Like from first to last, there's no more than like 30 seconds. But then you get to sled push and then it starts to open up a little bit. You got some people finishing in low 2 minutes. And then you got some people finishing like 5-6 minutes. Yeah. And then I think the next big station, I think the burpee broad jumps was a bit of a separator as well, but not massively. Probably.
What'd you do in your burpee broad jumps?
3:13.
What'd you do, Scott?
3:18.
I was 3:11.
Ooh, close.
And also on my deathbed at that point. No, it's literally like I'm gonna fucking give up. I don't want to do this anymore.
I think going into the burpee broad jumps, I came in I think in 8th place, and I came out of the burpee broad jumps in 5th, I think, or 4th.
Yeah, that was the first one I was sat in a proper squat for a long time. And the guys like, you gotta go, man. I was like, dude, I can't fucking straighten my leg out. I can't go.
But that's where I can, I could really see the body language of the other guys who'd probably gone a little bit too hot. The moment they started the burpee broad jumps, like you could see people were struggling a lot.
Sleeping on the floor.
Sleeping on the floor or just standing up for a long time.
Yeah.
And then I think the biggest separator is the wall balls. Yeah. There's a lot of people who got to the wall balls early and then ended up spending a long time on the wall balls. So I think it's definitely... speaking to like the Spartan races, we had quite a few like high level Spartan races in our race. They had said they just hadn't put enough time into wall balls. They'd thrown to like lower targets or to ceilings and hadn't accounted for that being a potential trip up. So I definitely say to people, like, make sure that's a movement you definitely put time into, because a lot of time there were guys in our race spending over 10 minutes on the wall balls. Yeah, that's right. And like fit, strong guys like who do a lot of weightlifting. So, okay, so just a quick one then. So Schalk, I'm going to ask you, if you were to redo the race, what would you change in terms of your pacing and execution?
First, I'll probably get myself a watch or something just for me to know how fast I'm running, because I had no idea how long my actual laps are taking me. They felt consistent, but if I look at the actual thing, okay, the first one doesn't count, but let's say 3.5 minutes for the first one. The slowest one was 7.5 minutes.
Holy
quite
shit!
a-
What were you doing, bro? And you didn't even get a cramp. You're not even stopping a stretch.
That was after my row, actually. I felt good after the row as well. So 7 minutes and 38 seconds. And then that was the
I think
slowest
Karan
one.
was walking his K fast.
He probably walked faster than that.
with cramp.
No, he did a 17-minute K.
Wow,
that must
okay.
have been a glitch on my.
So your strategy change would be?
I would probably get some sort of data tracking so I can actually know how fast I'm running. And then same as you guys, or what you did on the sled push, because I actually won the sled push in a 1:47 and actually died afterwards.
You should
So-
celebrate that a bit more on Instagram.
I should. So the first half I felt was the worst half.
Mm.
So definitely, in terms of just movements in general,
Yes.
like even if that was just by itself, I would probably find that most difficult. The first 4 things we did. So maybe just slowing those things down a little bit, and then hopefully have enough in the tank to increase as we go for the final 4. Because the last couple was what, the lunges, the carries, and the row and the wall balls. Like those weren't too bad.
Nice.
And even my run started feeling better. Obviously, it doesn't look like that. The last 2 felt that good because the 6th one was 7 minutes.
Yeah.
But I started feeling actually better as I went on.
Recovering. Yeah.
So yeah.
And what would you change?
I actually wouldn't change my pacing. I was actually very comfortable with that, and I was, the only thing that slowed me up was just seizing up into cramp. I think what I would change is, like Schalk mentioned before, is not getting there so early and being in the atmosphere if I can avoid it. I also would bring more options for food, which I didn't bring. I had a post-workout shake to have, and I had a pre- and post-workout meal. But once I got there, I wasn't hungry enough to eat the meal, and then when I was hungry, it was too close to the race to eat it. So I was like fishing around to try and find something, and I found some like terrible vegan protein bar, which is just a shitload of fat and like 5 grams of protein and like 10 grams of carbs, which is not what I was wanting to have. So I think that's probably something that I would try and do better. I would probably just eat a slightly bigger breakfast than I normally would as well. And I would work the technique on the sled pull. I would find a different technique, or at least get used to that technique to allow me to then execute my race that way.
Nice. Yeah, I think definitely the fueling on my side, I need to improve as well. I think you kind of forget, well, I'd forgotten because it's been so long since I've done a competition in an arena, like just the way that nerves impact appetite and the ability to keep food down. So I did actually have deliberately a bigger breakfast. And then I basically like force fed myself a second breakfast kind of around 11, which was about 4 hours before. But it was like a struggle, and I was burping for the next 4 hours, which was basically my body was like, don't want that in you. I got to a point where I felt like I was hydrated well, but I think, when just before we started warming up, I actually just went outside to just try and get some fresh air, and I was just going to do like just 5 minutes of just chill, bring myself into a calm state before going back in and warming up. And I found a little spot of sun, and I sat down, and when I closed my eyes, my heart rate was like, must have been at like over 100 beats per minute, and I couldn't feel it when I was in the environment, but the moment I stepped out into the quiet, I was like, holy shit, like I am stimulated right now. And I was like, okay, just gonna ride this and go straight in and let's just get on with it. But I think when you are in that environment, you just don't realize how much it's actually taking from you. And I think all 3 of us were on our feet a lot leading into the race. And it's interesting, in our race, in the men's pro, which is the very last event of the whole weekend, more than half the field went down with cramp. Much more than half. And there was points where guys are on all fours, like literally like screaming.
Hurdle one guy.
Screaming for like help. And that was interesting because in no other races really was there a majority of like the race going down cramp. Maybe the odd guy here or there. No, I didn't really see any women cramping. No. But yeah, in our race, all the pro guys were going down. So it's definitely interesting. Okay. How are we for time? Okay. We're going to go into training and preparation. Let's talk about our prep. And I think I'll summarize as to start. I think we all did similar stuff. We all generally are training for the sport of CrossFit. For you two, you guys follow the elite program, so you're training multiple times, so twice a day, 5 days a week, sometimes a 6th day. I train once a day, 5 days a week, about 60 to 90 minutes. So I think it's important to note that we didn't go all in to Hyrox. CrossFit was 3 to 4 days of training a week, and we basically put in 2 Hyrox sessions in a week. What those Hyrox session looks like, looked like we did one run-based session together on a Tuesday, which was where we would basically accumulate between 6 to 10K of running, and we kind of did faster interval-based work there. And then what Ant and Tammy were leading on a Saturday was really cool. We'd get together as a whole team, 30 to 40 people in the gym, and we would do building volume each week, basically renditions of Hyrox. And we started that 3 months before Hyrox. It started with just isolated running, and then we started to integrate some of the other movements. And then the kind of last 4 to 5 weeks, we were actually doing like 50% of Hyrox, 60% of Hyrox, 70% of Hyrox. And then I think we actually did one full Hyrox 2 weeks out.
Yeah.
And then we basically started to taper. Okay, so if you could do the prep again, but not change the time frame and stick to 2 sessions a week, what would you change, if anything?
I would probably just put a little bit more running volume in. So obviously as CrossFitters, we are going to be more well-versed and more confident and competent with the functional exercises. So we're basically coming from the view of it as we are not good runners. We need to improve the running, and we're going to be at least average or okay, if not better, at the functional exercises. So we bias the running side of things. So like you said, the first 6 weeks were basically done on a 400-meter track. But we all basically met up. We had no weights, no functional exercise or anything. It was pretty much just running, walking, intervals, running.
Yeah, basically getting comfortable with 8 kilometers.
Exactly, yeah. So just accumulating as well. For some people, it was like 5 to 6 kilometers because they weren't running fast enough. But most people, it was 8 kilometers. So in those early stages, I'd actually probably accumulate a bit more volume, just because of the way my legs blew up. You know, if I didn't cramp up on the weekend, then I'd probably be saying something different. But I'd probably try and accumulate just a little bit more running volume in my legs, because it was only an 11-week block, really, excluding the taper that we had. So 11 weeks to train. So yeah, the only thing I would change is, a bit more running volume at the start.
Nice.
Yeah, otherwise I'd keep it the same.
I think from a programming perspective, I think what you guys did was probably the better way or the best way to go about it. I think personally I would probably, because I skipped out on the simulation, so I never actually did the full thing before the actual Hyrox.
Yeah, same.
So maybe just actually probably doing something close to the actual race, just so you can see what it feels like going in between a run and whatever the exercise is next, and going then back into your run. We did a few of those things leading up to it, but never like the full thing like you guys did 2 weeks out. So that's the one thing I would probably change, is just...
And get a watch.
That's the main takeaway.
Yeah.
Just get a watch.
I honestly don't think I would change anything.
Yeah.
Like, I thought the prep was really good. I felt really confident. Obviously, in hindsight, the thing that, but it wasn't part of the question, what I actually needed to do is just run more in general. And I didn't really do any running until the 3-month mark. Before that, I literally haven't really run for the last 9 years. Maybe once, if it's programmed in an aerobic Tuesday, I'll do some running. But other than that, I haven't ever really been in the last 9 years since we played rugby, out on a run. But I do think that I've loved actually running again, and I do want to keep running in the program, but I really don't think I would have changed anything. Yeah. I basically got kind of 2.5 weeks out, and I was like, my body didn't really want to push anymore. So I basically started my deload probably 1.5 weeks early, but I was still doing a bit of running.
Unlike you.
Yeah, I'm very unlike me, yes. Okay, so I think we're all happy with the prep that we did. I think probably what we all agree is that getting more running in general, over a longer period of time is going to serve us all better, because I think, only speaking on behalf of us three, it's the running that really held us back. I think all three of us are pretty confident in the movements, but if we could be better runners, that would probably translate to faster times.
And better game day prep for me as well.
And better game day prep, and me as well. I think, competition practice and just exposing ourselves to that environment would also probably make us all a bit more comfortable, and not kind of, take away from performance as much. Okay, so I think a question a lot of people ask me, and it's a hard one to answer, but is it better to have a running background, or is it better to have a strength background before coming into Hyrox? I'll jump into it to start and say, remember that there is 8 kilometers of running still. And whilst the other stations, that you only have to do each of those stations once. So what I'll generally say is that it would be great. It's probably better to have a running background, but you need to, at the very least, be able to do each of the implements to a half decent standard. So what I mean by that, it's no good at having a running background, but you're not strong enough to move a sled.
Yeah.
I also just want to say that there was not one person at Hyrox who couldn't move the sled.
Yeah.
And I think that was something that scares a lot of people coming into a Hyrox because they see the weights and they think, I'm not going to be able to do it. And within our community, like, everyone was really scared. There was even parts where I was like a bit worried because I knew I hadn't really put sled work into my training before. But the slipperiness of the carpet meant that even, you know, we had some ladies who probably have only been doing strength training for like a few months who are, you know, 50 kilograms who are still able to move the sled in the open division. So I'd say for most people, don't worry too much about that. But I would say, generally speaking, if you have a running background and you're strong enough to at least do each movement decently well, that would probably be a better place to come into versus being really strong and proficient in all the movements but not being able to run.
Yeah.
Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, for sure. But again, like, you know, it's relative, like you said. You know, you can be an elite runner and you have to do 3 wall balls at a time. Like, you're just not going to win a race in that way. Which actually was similar to what the guys ahead of me were doing, but they were just so far ahead I couldn't catch them anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely a trade-off there.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Okay, this is going to be a fun question. We're going to talk about the test now. The actual test, which is the K and then the stations in between. So we can't change the test because you can't just make it whatever you want. But if you could change the order of the movements, what would you change and why? I want to start just by saying I like wall balls at the end because I think it's a massive like trip up station that people massively undershoot. There is one thing though I thought about, which is it would be good as a spectator and as a racer to have a 1K run after the wall balls. To basically finish the race with a sprint that everyone could do, and to really force athletes to see like who really wants this. I think that would be quite cool to see like people, you know, like leave the wall balls at similar times and it'd just be like, okay, who wants this run more?
That would be so savage.
That would be savage, and it would make the competition hurt a lot more. Potentially, it would pull people back from like going as hard on the wall balls because they'd have to leave something in tank. But that's just one thing I thought about.
I would not want to do that.
No, that would be horrible, but it'd be fun to watch.
Yeah. Order change.
So, what about Schalk? You know, you said that you felt for you and your ability that the competition was like more heavily loaded for harder things at the start of the race. Would you potentially split up things like the sled push and the sled pull?
Yeah, I would probably, like, if you look at the actual list, I would probably try to do, the run's obviously going to stay consistent, right? But I would, let's say, do a ski erg into a strength piece, into, let's say, a burpee broad jump, into a strength piece, into
a row, then a strength piece.
Instead of going sled push, sled pull, then burpees, and then you go into a carry and a lunge, which is more like just like strength things basically paired together the entire time, and conditioning stuff paired together the entire time.
Yeah,
I might just flop them back and forth.
I think what that would do would make it a lot easier to stay consistent with your pacing, because right now it basically goes aerobic. It basically goes strength, aerobic, strength. Because I don't really call the farmers carry strength movement for most people. They were able to pretty much go through that the whole time. Ant, any thoughts?
Similar to you. Like, I would love to see the sled push at the end, towards the end of it. That would be brutal. And also, if that sled push was done as like 50 meters straight, it could be quite a cool way to finish as well. You imagine like getting to the finish line close with someone and having to then sprint on a sled would be horrible as well.
Or what if you did the same sled, but if you didn't do the 12.5 unbroken, there'd be like a burpee penalty.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well. I was also thinking my sled the entire time was on the line, and pulling it on the tape line must have made it harder for me. I was thinking the whole time. I literally asked my judge to move it, and he tried to move it, and he couldn't move it, so I just left it. But I was just reminiscing just then. I think that would be hard to push, like have like an unbroken style piece of like a judging standard on the sled push. That would make it horrible as well.
Yeah, I think it's like I've heard people complaining about the order of movements. saying that's like, oh, it's too biased towards this way, it's too biased towards that way, it's not evenly spread. But I think at the end of the day, that's just the nature of the sport. And if this is what they dictate the sport's going to look like, then it's our job of athletes to prepare for the sport and be able to do it.
Yeah.
Like there really is no right or wrong way to do it. It just is what it is.
I can imagine them making a Hyrox elite and going like 10K.
10K,
Yeah.
maybe going even heavier.
Well, yeah. There's like a few other things that I would consider putting in there. Like if you've got a row and a ski, you can definitely put a bike erg in there for sure. And I would probably put in something like another carry, like a sandbag carry, which is totally different, and it's definitely a game changer when you're breathing hard to try and carry a sandbag versus a farmer's carry is easy, especially 32 kg for
Sandbag carry would be horrible.
Yeah, that would be hard.
Yeah.
Like a Hustafel style where you have to hold it in front of you. Yeah.
I think something that I think would make Hyrox even more attractive is that from a spectator side, from a spectator point of view, it's not a great event to watch because the volume of people in each division means you have to stagger in waves, which means you don't actually know what place people finish until everyone has crossed the line and the results come up on the board. Now, in our heat, it worked out well because basically everyone in the first heat ended up being the top 10 to 15. So it was kind of fun to watch people race. In the women's pro, there was only 10 women.
Yeah.
So they were all racing together. So you could see the race play out and see who was in the lead, who was overtaking. That was cool. But in bigger divisions, you literally have no idea where anyone is in the race until the whole race is done and you look at the leaderboard and you see it.
Yeah.
So I think that makes it quite hard to follow along. I think what CrossFit does well is like, you know, when you're in an arena, there's a start mat and there's a finish mat, and you can see people move like chess pieces, you know, down the floor. So even for someone who doesn't understand the sport, you know who's winning and who the battles are between. And I think finding a way to somehow, you know, like if, you know, like Concept 2 rowers, you can link people up to a screen and you can see where their rowboats are.
Yeah.
It would be cool to maybe have something like that where you can see the people on a screen and where they were relative to each other to see who was in the lead. And I also think as a spectator, based on maybe it's just the way that our event was laid out with the 3 laps of the L, the running was kind of just a non-event. No one gave a shit about the running, even though it's really a running race. And people were basically just waiting at the stations. So people would watch you compete in the station and then just spend their time walking to the next station and not really caring what happened in between.
Yeah.
And then they'd just be waiting at the next station, watch you perform next station. And then it was like, okay, let's go wait at the next station.
Yeah.
And so I think finding a way for a spectator to be able to watch it, and even like if this was going to become a televised event, you know, for it to be able to, you'd be able to see that race play out and like really cheer for the battles.
I think the one thing to kind of rebuttal what you said at the beginning about having like 2 different heats is that I know normally they would look at your previous result and they would put you in a heat based off your previous result. So they'd look at your score and be like, oh, you're a 108 guy. Okay, cool. We've got 20 guys who are sub 108. You're going in heat 2. You're going heat 1. Sorry. Heat 2 is 108
and to be
sub.
fair, they did ask us what our predicted finish, but I put down my predicted finish time as 1 hour 30. Because I literally had no idea what I was going to finish, so I probably would have screwed that all up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is a way to counter it.
Yeah, but obviously it's still a new sport, so they're going to be collecting data over the next 6 years as like new people fold into this.
Yeah. Okay, my last question, second last question. We talked about movement standards already. So we've talked about like the burpee broad jump being maybe it's a little bit iffy. We talked about the wall ball standard. What would you change in terms of the movement standards? So this means you could technically potentially change a movement altogether to make the judging standards and the movement standards more clear. I'll start with the burpee. I think if you made it something like in CrossFit, we do something like a burpee over a bar or a burpee box jump or a burpee box jump over, or even like a burpee to touch a target above you. Something where there was like a more definitive start and finish position, where there was like a physical touch, I think would make it a lot easier to judge. But I still think you would need individual judges per athlete. You couldn't have one judge hovering on the floor. That's one standard that I would say.
I think even just taking away the forearm thing, like just taking that thing away and having people to jump as far as they want to jump and placing their hands where they want to place their hands, like would that make that big a difference really?
I guess as long as you're not, that's a good point. As long as you're not jumping forward when you land.
Yeah.
And as long, I guess if you just said you can
It's
go
like
anywhere
frog
you want.
hopping
Yeah,
down
because I
there.
actually played around when we started the prep. I would land and basically just dead drop forward and land with my hands and do a eccentric push up to the floor. Not very efficient, so you're not
Yeah.
going to do that, but I mean...
I saw some good ones. There was a guy who would land on his feet, then he'd drop to his knees, and it was a painful drop because he'd drop from height. And then he'd place his hands next to his knees, so technically he's kind of like within the foot. But then he'd slide forward from there, and then do his next burpee from there. So he was like gaining literally like 4 foot, and the judge was like scratching his head, being like, "Something doesn't look right here," but I don't know what it is. This guy was crushing it.
Yeah, I guess you do like a line burpee. They do it in
Yeah.
they do it in their PFT, so I don't know why they don't do it.
Burpee over a line.
Yeah, so they basically got 2 lines a meter apart, and you got to jump over that and not touch a line. But in the PFT, for example, there's no judging standards in the PFT, so that would be something I would change firstly, because PFT is also an online leaderboard, and they're like, wow, like you came top 10 in the world. It's like, well, I did my burpees, like for example, like Tammy did it. She did her burpees laterally the whole time, which I don't know. It's not in the rules that you have to do it facing the line, but I did it facing the line, so she's doing like 90 degrees of turning less than me every single burpee. Her hand release push-ups, which are in the PFT as well, you know, she would say as well, they're a disgrace, but she just did it to the standard of whatever they said, which is just your chest touches the floor and then your chest isn't on the floor. That was the standard, versus your chest and thighs leave at the same time.
I feel like the PFT is more of just a bit more of like a marketing ploy.
Absolutely,
Because
yeah.
also using the PFT as a benchmark as to how well you can do in a Hyrox, it's a completely different test.
Yeah, I would change that as well.
Completely different test, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess that's the start of it, right? If people think you can get away with it, then you're going to get away
I do
with
think
it.
it's cool that they have this kind of like entry level test that gets people excited.
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea. But
I think warble standard. I mean, it's a simple standard. If you can't do it, you can't do it. I would definitely not offer a bucket. That is like, if you can't do a warble, you can't do a warble. You can just do one at a time, unfortunately.
yeah, the thing is, if you can't squat, if you actually cannot get your hips below parallel,
But everyone can with a warble.
yeah,
Everyone can. You just hold the warble further away from you,
Yeah.
you'll counterbalance your squat. And that's going to suck because it's going to take you 20 minutes to do 100 or 75. But that's the rule, right? It's not like, oh, it's okay. Well, let's stick a massive bucket under your ass.
I think what would be cool as well, somehow, is for you to know where the athletes were in the station. So the good thing about the burpee broad jumps, the lunges, and the farmer's carry,
Start and finish.
and the sled was that there was a start and finish. So you could see athletes working their way towards the finish, so you knew where they were at.
Yeah.
Whereas the row, the ski erg, the wall balls, that's pretty much it. Row, ski erg, and wall balls, like you have no idea where the athlete is because they're just on the spot working through reps. I think again that's another cool thing that would be cool for a spectator to know how far someone was
Maybe
through.
even
the
on
event.
the sleds as well, having other, as you said earlier, one long stretch, or having like some sort of counter. Because
Yeah,
I
you
was
could see
watching on
people
Saturday
moving.
and I was like, did he do 4? Is he done? Does he have 2 more? Does he have 3 more? Yeah, I have no idea actually.
Yeah. Cool. Good food for thought. Last question. Would you do another Hyrox?
Yes.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
I think the next Hyrox in Hong Kong is going to be around March time, which I think for us is going to be
May,
probably in the
March,
middle.
May,
Yeah, probably in the middle of the CrossFit season. But they did say that they're going to be looking to have 2 next year. So I would definitely probably look to do the latter one in the year. And I do know that Hyrox are going to make a big splash in 2023. They want to be hosting events all around the world on a more regular basis. So it's really cool to see. I'm excited to see what comes of this. Be cool to see maybe CrossFit is transitioning into that space. Maybe people from Hyrox transitioning into CrossFit, because I think CrossFit is a really great general preparatory tool for the sport of Hyrox. I would like to just quickly talk about something that we're going to be doing here at the process. We are going to be sharing Hyrox programs with the world. So we're going to be creating some anywhere between 8 to 12 to 16 week training cycles that people can follow to prep for their Hyrox competition. Wherever you are in the world, you can kind of start this at any point in time and follow along. Early stages of development right now, but we're going to have the ability for people to choose to attack their weaknesses. So if people need more running, they'll have the ability to adjust to a more running bias program. People need more strength work, they can choose that track. If people are balanced athletes, and they can have something that balances the two. We're going to help you guys find ways to assess that and know which which one you fall into. And yeah, like all of our programs, you'll have the option to have a coach guide you through the process. You'll have an option to basically just take yourself through the process. But really what we're saying is that we love Hyrox. We love what it's doing. We want to take part in it more. Our community had an amazing time. As I said, over 40 people who took part, and like everyone's still buzzing from the weekend. And we want to basically just share our expertise and what we have learned from it, and we'll continue to learn from the sport and share that with the world. And so, yeah, stay tuned on our social media channels. Follow us as coaches on our pages, and we'll keep you guys up to date with regards to when that's coming out.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts, chaps?
I think the one thing that Hyrox do really, really well is they celebrate a lot of athletes, and they celebrate it quite quickly. It's not like, oh, you have to hang around. It's like your race is done. Okay, let's announce the podium finishes for the race, but also for the age group. So a lot of people are coming away with like amazing, physical experience of the race. But then they also got like this banner which says they came first, second, or third. And like then you got, the data on the phone, which is like something you're taking away, which a lot of the time you don't get in any other race. Like in marathon, you go on, it's just a finishing time, So with this, it's actually really cool that they're celebrating people in every age category there is. And then those people also have the chance to move forward. So people in the open category, mixed doubles can also move forward to Manchester. It's not like only the elite move forward. So I think that's pretty cool.
Awesome, boys. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for sharing your experiences and thoughts. And obviously really enjoy competing with you guys and all the prep that led up to it, and looking forward to our next one.
See you at the finish line.